Okay. Hi, everyone. Again, welcome to the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni in Higher Ed's webinar series. My name is Amy Salazar. I'm on the executive leadership team for the collaborative. If you're joining us by computer, you can see I've put the contact information up for the NRC FAHER website. If you're not already getting our emails, then you can go to the website www.nrc-fahe.org and scroll down to the bottom of that first screen, and there's a place where you can subscribe. So thanks for coming today. Before I introduce today's webinar, I'll tell you briefly about our March webinar. So our March webinar will be held on Monday, March 16th. From noon to 1 Pacific time, which is 3 to 4 Eastern. And the presenter will be Bridget Colaccio Wesley, who initiated the First Star Academy at Loyola University, Chicago. And her presentation, entitled First Star Academy, Reflections on an Innovative Program for Foster Youth on a College Campus, will share findings from data collected throughout their program's implementation. It'll provide insights for practitioners considering how to best support foster youth in and through high school and beyond, and for scholars looking at questions of youth, well-being, and relationships. So please join us for that if you're able to. Okay, so our agenda for today, our webinar presenter, we have two presenters today, and they'll present for about 35 to 40 minutes. And then for the last 15 minutes or so, we will open up for Q&A time. For Q&A time, I ask that you please keep yourselves on mute and type any questions that you have into the chat box. Feel free to type those questions in as we go. I will hold the questions until the end, but just so you don't forget them as we go, you can type them in any time, and we'll come back to those at the end of the presentation. If you're joining us by phone, you can email me your questions. My email address is amy.salazar@wsu.edu. So that's amy.salaz, like zebra, ar@wsu.edu. Okay, so today's presentation is entitled Utilizing Data from the Jim Casey Initiative to Improve Educational Outcomes. And we have two presenters. Maddie Day serves as a site liaison for the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Jim Casey Youth Opportunities Initiative. And she spent the last 10 years of her career focused on improving education outcomes for students with experience in foster care, first through founding the University of Washington's Champions Program in 2010, and then through developing and directing Fostering Success Michigan from 2012 to 2018. Our second presenter, Rachel Rosenberg, is a research scientist at Child Trends, and Rachel's research focuses on the social supports that young people transitioning out of foster care and into adulthood need to be successful. And Rachel leads the data and research evaluation partnership that Child Trends has with the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Jim Casey Initiative. So we're really excited to have both of them here today. And Maddie and Rachel, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks, Amy. Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We know we have some folks from within the Jim Casey Initiative Network and external to the Jim Casey Network. So Rachel and I are going to provide a little bit of opening context, and then we're going to get to the content today. So we will jump to the next slide and continue on. So this is Maddie. You can see my lovely face right there. And I serve in the role, I am a senior fellow with Case Commons. I serve in the role of site liaison with our Jim Casey Initiative sites. I'll let Rachel introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Rachel Rosenberg. I'm a research scientist too at Child Trends. And I have had the pleasure of working with the Jim Casey Initiative through our data and self-evaluation partnership for about 2.5 years now.
Great. Thanks, Rachel.
Maddie, is it okay if I just cut in really quick? I forgot to mention that Maddie and Rachel have a lot of links to reports that, since you're watching this from a screen, you can't probably won't be able to click on those links. So they're going to be putting links to reports that they've worked on in the chat box. So sorry, I forgot to say that before.
No problem. And actually, thank you for that, because that's just a helpful reminder. And we will kind of be putting them in just as we hit the content, so they're a little bit organized. But again, if you have questions, would like direction toward any of the reports that we mentioned, you can always follow up with Amy, Rachel, or myself after this webinar. So to jump right in, the Jim Casey Youth Opportunities Initiative is focused on a specific population of young people aged 14 through 26 who have spent at least one day in foster care after their 14th birthday. And we are really focused in on this, and the initiative has had a longstanding commitment to this group of young people because we see such great opportunity for improving the trajectory of their lives post their foster care experience. This totals, as you can see here, about 874,000 young people. Our current population that we support through a network of 17 states and jurisdictions is roughly 317,000 young people. And in addition to the number of young people, our 17 states and jurisdictions, we also do maintain a large network of colleagues with expertise in a variety of areas. So our ultimate result with the Jim Casey Youth Opportunities Initiative is really focused on ensuring young people have resources, relationships, and opportunities that will guide them toward well-being and success. So in our next slide, you'll see the framework that we use and that we engage in with our sites and the young people that we work with. So the initiative is really focused on 4 key indicator areas. You see them here listed. And of course, today we will be focused in on education success and economic security. And in many ways, we know that these go hand in hand, both from the research standpoint and the practitioner standpoint. We also have 5 best practice principles, and these are really, I like to describe them as the threads that are woven through every single part of the work that we do. And I would absolutely say that there's a reason that authentic youth engagement and racial and ethnic equity and inclusion are at the top, and those are really, some of our, I would say, kind of guiding star threads. And we have a really robust network of fellows that have been engaged with the initiative from the beginning that both help guide, engage, and deliver work at the site level and the national level. And we're always focused on how this work, and you'll see this through a lot of the research that we present this way, how this work can really lift up the disparate outcomes between our different populations that experience foster care. So one piece that I want to highlight of our programming that is, I think, fairly unique, and some people know, you might have heard about it if you're outside of the network, is our Jim Casey Initiative Opportunity Passport Program. The Opportunity Passport Program aims to provide young people with education and experience in financial literacy and supports them to acquire assets that will enable them to be better equipped to reach their life goals. We will touch on some of the Opportunity Passport pieces later on, but I do just want to give a plug that if you're interested in learning more about the Opportunity Passport program, and in particular our financial literacy training, which is called KEYS, we will be including some of those pieces, or we'll be including links to those documents in the chat box as we go. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Maddie. And I apologize for that brief technical difficulty a few slides ago. Thanks for sticking with me.
No problem.
Great. So I am going to introduce and talk a little bit about a few data sources, and then move in and actually present some recent findings from analyses that we have finished up in the past few years. So I'm going to start by talking about the two main Jim Casey Initiative databases. The first one is Opportunity Passport Participant Survey System, or OPS, as we like to call it. And the Jim Casey Initiative collects data twice a year from young people across their 17 partner states through OPS. OPS focuses on young people ages 14 to 26 who are enrolled in that Opportunity Passport program that you just heard about. And this comes out to be about 3,000 young people in any given survey month. The survey includes data on young adult outcomes such as housing, employment, education, young parenthood, and it also includes information on demographic characteristics, foster care background and history, youth engagement, and social capital. In addition to OPS, the Jim Casey Initiative also collects data through the Opportunity Passport Data System, or OPDS. OPDS is an administrative data set on those same young people who are enrolled in Opportunity Passport. And it includes information on more of the financial education and asset development data. So it includes information on if the young person has completed financial education, if they have savings towards an asset, and then if they have purchased an approved asset, it has information on that purchase. So in addition to the two Jim Casey Initiative databases, OPS and OPDS, we rely heavily on national administrative data to provide either a comparison to the program data and often just to provide a better understanding of what's happening nationally for this population of young people. So one of the most frequently utilized data sources that we use is the National Youth in Transition Database Outcomes and Services file. NYDID Outcomes provides information on young people who were in care within 45 days after their 17th birthday and follows up with those same young people at ages 19 and 21. So I do want to acknowledge that while NYDID has some limitations, such as low response rates in some states, it is one of the few national data sources on young adult outcomes among young people with foster care experience. And so you will see this report utilized a few times in the analyses that I'm getting ready to talk about. Great. So now I'm going to jump in to present on a recently updated data analysis project that we worked on that's actually pretty interesting and unique. So the first analysis you'll see on your screen, and when these slides get emailed out, the links on these title screens have the hyperlinks that you can follow to read more. But the first analysis I'm going to present on does utilize data from the Jim Casey Initiative OPS and OPDS databases that I just talked about. And it focuses on examining the relationship between purchasing an asset and young adult outcomes in those asset domains. So for example, you could answer a question such as, do young people who purchase an educational asset, which can be anything from textbooks, SAT prep, tuition, kind of anything of that nature, experience better educational outcomes or different educational outcomes than their peers? So before I dive into what we found, I do want to give a little bit more information about what we actually did. So this analysis does require young people to have completed at least 2 Opportunity Passport participant surveys because we need to know their educational responses from their previous survey responses. Then we can look at their survey response post-asset purchase. So it allows us to kind of put in time order when they're making those asset purchases. So as mentioned, we do control for previous responses to the survey so that we can really try to see young adult outcomes post asset purchase. We also control for gender, race, age, and state. The reason that we control for state is because the Jim Casey Initiative sites vary in size across those states. So controlling for state allows us just to ensure that we're not seeing something happening in just one state that's kind of dominating the model. All right, now to what we found. So overall, we did find that young people who purchase assets experience better outcomes, particularly in education. So young people who purchase an educational asset, so this again includes things such as tuition, GRE prep, textbooks, kind of anything of that nature, were more likely to be enrolled in school at their next survey. I do want to mention that while we didn't specifically look at only post-secondary enrollment, most young people who complete a survey are over the age of 18. And this just goes to kind of reinforce that asset development programs and having that match savings to help with the rising cost of tuition and textbooks may be an additional source of support for young people as they transition out of foster care and seek post-secondary training. I'm gonna hand it back over to Maddie to discuss some practice implications from this analysis.
Great, thanks so much, Rachel. So, you know, one of the questions that I think is important for those of us who are practitioners is to really just kind of think of like, why asset purchases? Why is asset development something that, you know, we're focusing on, we're gathering data around, and, you know, while we all might have some thoughts around that, I just think it's important to sort of ground us in the reality of asset development being a very critical and also very normative part of development for a young adult, right? And that it's critical not only to have access, to increase participation in the workforce, but also as a form of self-efficacy, positive self-identity, and motivation toward achieving one's goals. I posted a quote here, and this comes from a study that I did post the link to in the chat box. It's around opportunity investment accounts, particularly their ability to, you know, build capital for young people with experience in foster care. And one of the pieces that always, you know, kind of catches me about this quote in particular and sort of the idea of investment in asset purchases and sort of the larger piece of financial literacy and asset development is that, you know, really in practice, we should consider how these, how programming can support elements identified here. Like I said, the financial literacy, the ability to learn the skills of effective long-term decision-making, and see those as providing a way for young people from foster care to have a space where they can fail safely. And, you know, this piece in the quote around having, you know, sort of an adult around them who can help navigate these responsibilities, I think is really critical. And, you know, for many people that don't have foster care experience, we have the opportunity to build assets, build savings, make purchases, and sometimes those don't always work out, right? We've all had those experiences. For our young people with experience in foster care, their ability to fail and fail safely is the margin is much slimmer. And so putting these programs like Opportunity Passport and the KEYS curriculum into play really provide some widening of that margin, and I think provide some scaffolding that young people, that our young people have. You know, and I think it's also about understanding that some of these skills around decision making and purchasing just have not been supported by our child welfare system. You know, there's policies state to state, and yes, we're all moving toward normalcy as a practice. However, you know, it still varies quite widely how young people are able to make decisions for themselves, and particularly in the sort of asset purchasing space. And so I would encourage you, if any of you are in a space or running programs where you can consider an asset building component, to both look at Opportunity Passport. Again, we included the link. It's on the Annie E. Casey Foundation website. I would also encourage you to look into things like opportunity investment accounts, and the study that is the proposal, the brief that is referenced here, provides some really interesting ways to think about how we might leverage existing pots of money or existing funding streams in ways that actually kind of can be, exponentially more powerful, particularly around the consideration of education assets, right? And so thinking about money that might be available, and rather than giving that in, a one-time scholarship form, could that be put into an opportunity investment account that can grow over a number of years and have, a greater opportunity to offset debt burden and cost of education later on. So again, these practice implications that I will be providing in response to the data are, kind of our thinking around how we see the data, impacting practice, but also opportunities for systems change. We would love to hear from you, and so definitely use the chat box feature or email to send in questions that you might have for Amy, thoughts, or even examples of how you are, learning from this data and how that's reflecting in your own work. So I will turn it back to Rachel, and she's going to take you through the next report.
Great. So our next report is from the Future Savings Report that was released a while back. The Future Savings Report really makes kind of the economic case for investing in young people with foster care experience as they transition to adulthood. The Future Savings Report presents the costs associated with society kind of staying or keeping as is, and continuing to allow young people to age out of foster care without the needed resources and supports that they need. I do want to mention that this report includes 4 domains: education, housing, incarceration, and young parenthood. We're only going to present on the education findings, but I do encourage you to follow the link that's on this slide and in the chat box if you would like to read the full report. Right. So similar to the last report, I am going to start with methodology to go over what we did before I do what we found. The Future Savings Report utilizes both individual costs, such as income, and societal costs, such as loss of tax revenue, to estimate a full cost to society if young people continue to age out of foster care at similar rates. So our estimates are based on a cohort of young people who are going to age out of foster care each year, which we've estimated to be about 23,000 young people. And then in order to estimate how many more young people would graduate from high school each year, we did use peer-reviewed literature and the American Community Survey to find those completion rates, both for the general population up to age 21 and rates of young people with foster care experience up to age 21. We then examined the difference in those numbers and multiplied that by 23,000 in order to get the number of young people who would achieve better outcomes if those disparities between young people with foster care experience and their general population peers no longer existed. Once we found that number, we then we used the number of young people that we just calculated in the first step, multiplied by the cost associated with not graduating high school. So we used peer-reviewed literature to find that cost. And I will mention that we then inflated everything to 2017 dollars and discounted it if the savings would not be fully recognized within the first year. And so this allows us to account for the fact that loss of income and taxes is actually over a working lifetime, so up to age 65. And so those costs would not be, we wouldn't see that full cost within 1 year. Lastly, after we did all of the methodology, we sent everything to a colleague who is an economist and who kind of specializes in cost benefit and cost avoidance analysis, who looked over everything to ensure that we were using rigorous and reliable data. And I do want to mention, for those of you who are familiar with this report and previous versions of this report, I do want to just go ahead and mention off the bat that the final number, so the final cost avoided number, is slightly lower than in previous versions. And this is really just due to, as time goes on and more research is done both with the general population and with young people in foster care, we're able to get really precise estimates, and we're able to kind of make adjustments and parse out costs associated with other domains. And so the numbers are just fluctuating some as the field gains more research and more data for us to pull from. All right, so I know this is not always the easiest to follow without a really specific example. So I'm gonna go ahead and dive into what we found, and I think hopefully that will help solidify what we did here. All right, so young adults without a high school diploma in the general population are estimated to have a lifetime income and tax loss of more than $400,000. And about 89% of the general population will earn a high school diploma by age 21. And that's compared to only about 66% of young people with foster care experience by age 21. So if we factor those numbers into the equation presented on the last slide, we'll learn that 5,290 more young people with foster care experience would graduate high school each year if they graduated at the same rate as their general population peers. This would ultimately result in $2.17 billion in economic gains over those young people's working lifetime. So this means that for each cohort of 23,000 young people leaving care, over 5,000 additional young people would graduate high school, resulting in more than $2 billion in economic gains by the time that those young people are 65 years or older. So this has pretty large implications for society and is really compounded when you think about the potential increase in earnings for young people who have a post-secondary education and credential. So while we only focus on high school education and GED completion, we know that young people who complete post-secondary education earn more than their peers who have a high school diploma. This wage gap is estimated to be around $17,000 per year per person. So as more young people with foster care experience graduate high school and are able to enroll and complete post-secondary education, the potential for that $2.17 billion in economic gains continues to grow and potentially has an even larger impact, both on the individuals that we serve and on society as a whole through, an increase in income and spending and tax revenue.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. I can fully own that I love this report. I take it many places with me. And one of the things that I think is really compelling to me about this is that it really clearly highlights the opportunity for us to engage a variety of partners from sectors outside of child welfare to consider how they might be contributing to both sort of systems that maintain these achievement gaps and also systems that have the ability to close and bridge these achievement gaps for our young people. You know, and in some ways, you know, I look at these numbers and I don't love putting up numbers that just sort of speak to disparate outcomes that we know, but they are powerful. And I think that one of the pieces to keep in mind with that is that these numbers don't speak to a lack of capability for the individual. The really a key takeaway is that these numbers speak to an opportunity that we have to invest differently in our systems and really create more effective systems to support our students with experience in foster care. And, you know, for those of us that are practitioners, we have started to do this. We've seen this, and it's actually very heartening to see that there's research that's beginning to kind of, I would say, you know, sort of lift up what we have said and observed in practice. One of those pieces is a new report out of California with Education Results Partnership and California College Pathways that highlighted the significance of campus support programming on persistence and success for students with experience in foster care. And this was, you know, looked at in comparison to just providing financial resources alone. And we can get, you know, sort of caught often in arguments of, you know, should we just provide the scholarship, you know, or should we, you know, do something else? And while I would say, please provide the scholarship, provide the tuition waiver, provide the money, period, for our students, we also need to provide the people that will support and walk alongside our students as they're navigating this education to career pipeline. You know, I think it's one of the opportunities that we have to really leverage in real time and really see kind of that leverage exponentially in the outcomes of our students. So with that, I will turn it back to Rachel and we'll move to the next study.
Great. So this is the last study that we're going to highlight, and it is a recent study that was released by myself and a few colleagues here at Child Trends. And this brief utilizes the National Youth in Transition database to examine participation in extended foster care and young adult outcomes among those who are in extended foster care. And again, the study itself is hyperlinked, so once you have the slides, you can read the full report or check the chat box and you can find the link to the full report there. All right. So the National Youth in Transition Database Outcomes File has data on cohorts of young people at 17, 19, and 21. So states are responsible for interviewing all 17-year-olds who are in foster care during the baseline year for each wave for each cohort of young people. They're then supposed to follow up with those same young people at ages 19 and 21. So our current brief examines school enrollment among 19 and 21-year-olds and the receipt of educational aid. Educational aid is provided through the National Youth in Transition Database Services File. The Services File is administrative data provided by the states on all federally funded Chafee independent living services. So I do want to acknowledge again that we are focusing on school enrollment, not necessarily completion, and then that receipt of educational aid as it's reported through the administrative data set. And we will present differences by race, ethnicity for this analysis. We examined several other young adult outcomes in the broader report. So if you're interested, take a look and feel free to follow up with questions. Right, so overall, we found that young people who participate in extended foster care were more likely to be enrolled in school and receive educational aid at ages 19 and 21. We also examined participation in extended foster care at age 19, but not at age 21, to see if even kind of a small dose or a short stay in extended foster care if that matters, if young people experience better outcomes. And we found that even staying in extended foster care for a short amount of time is associated with better odds of receiving educational aid. I think this is particularly interesting. We often kind of talk about, is extended care to 21 just kind of delaying kind of a similar set of circumstances happening, or is it truly providing additional services and potentially making an additional impact? And based on our findings and some recent findings from other studies, it seems to be that yeah, even participating in extended foster care for a short stay is associated with some better outcomes. I do want to mention that we did not find these same benefits across all young people. So we did find that extended foster care did seem to lead to different outcomes for white young people as compared to their peers of color. So Black young people were less likely to be enrolled in school and receive educational aid, and they were more likely to graduate high school than their white peers also in extended foster care. The same held true for Hispanic young people, who were also less likely to be enrolled in school or receive educational aid, but more likely to graduate high school than their white peers also in extended foster care. I think these findings are particularly important and highlight that while young people of color in extended foster care may be more likely to graduate high school than their white peers in extended foster care, there seems to then be something happening and additional hurdles to enrollment in post-secondary education and the receipt of that educational aid, which can be so critical in terms of being able to both afford school and tuition and also necessities to live and quality of life concerns. And with that, I will hand it over to Maddie to talk about some additional practice implications.
Great, thank you, Rachel. So, I think in some ways this study can take a minute to kind of get your head around, but I so appreciate the way that Rachel and her colleague Sam, really took time to really disaggregate and look below kind of the headlines of what came up. And I think it's, really quite significant that we see that, our young people of color, Black and brown young people in foster care are more likely to have a high school diploma or GED, and that we see that as one of the benefits to the extension of foster care, while at the same time we hold this reality that there is this great disparity ongoing, and that there's work to be done to really understand how we can better support our population, our Black and brown students, toward increased enrollment and financial aid support in post-secondary education. It's one of those things where sometimes I look and go, so you're sort of set up so well. What did we miss in the system? What sort of hole did we allow you to fall through in the pathway that you fell out of on the next step of post-secondary education? And I think in a lot of ways, this really connects to the theme that I have been saying throughout this presentation, that there's such a huge impact that the people in the lives of our young people with experience in foster care can play, and that they matter so much, and that we as practitioners and policymakers and researchers really have the responsibility to address the ways in which the system is not responsive to the diverse needs of our student population, and that we really need to take a look at our extended foster care programming and really understand what might be missing in the ways in which this is being developed and administered in various states. And I think there's some studies that are, I think, coming out with some interesting ideas on this. There's a study out of Nebraska that looked at their implementation of their Bridges to Independence program. I don't have that citation here, but I can share it with folks if they're interested. And of course, we know that the Cal Youth Study has a lot of information that's coming out. One of the things that was really intriguing out of the Nebraska study was that when they interviewed young people and they looked at the findings, there was a lot of discussion around definitions of success and how that success should be achieved. And I think that that's something that we need to really take back to the table and have deeper discussions with, the young adults in our life, to really understand, as they have experienced or are experienced extended foster care, are the elements that are involved in that really setting them up for success, really supporting them in that trajectory, and what pieces might we be inadvertently putting in or putting upon them, particularly for our Black and Brown students, that prohibits them from continuing to pursue their education. So I would say, I apologize, there's not a lot of what I can say is, as far as this is what I think that you should do. I think that we actually have more opportunities to come to the table to really have deeper and more intentional discussions with our young people about how do we do this better, and how do we do this better for our students who are seeing the most disparate outcomes. So with that, Rachel and I are going to just share a few little call to actions that we have. And again, we'll say, so after this, we would love to have some questions. We'd love to talk with you all about, things that you're doing in your work, in your practice that might resonate with some of the data, questions that you might have. So please feel free to send those to Amy, send those in. Don't be shy. We love to have that conversation. So these are just 3 points. We call them a call to action, things that we would love to see sort of improved on the system level. One, I'm sure I don't need to tell a group of researchers and practitioners this, but improving NIDA data, the NIDA data gathering process to ensure the diversity of post-care experiences are captured accurately. We really believe that that's a critical piece to just having a better handle on the outcomes of what is happening with our young people, and really rethinking and kind of bolstering the NIDA data process. I am just sort of selfishly, I'll identify as an ESSA junkie. I think that it's a fantastic policy. It's a great start. I think that we have a long way to go with that. But one of the pieces that I would like to see is that there's a broader dissemination of ESSA data, an expansion upon what is required to be captured. And I will put it out there that our colleagues in Indiana, have done some great work working with both their state child welfare and their state education agencies to get reports through a legislative process, but get reports that required some broader data be captured around students with experience in foster care, and the ways in which that is enabling them to develop responses to sort of the larger needs that we see for our young people in K-12 who are in foster care, I think is really remarkable, and I think is a potential roadmap for other states to follow. And then lastly, I will just say, improved tracking and evaluation of extended foster care implementation and program designs. We're starting to see some of this come out. It's really exciting to see the learning come out. And I would say it's especially exciting when you see that learning underscored and centered on the voices and the experience of the young people who this programming is geared to serve. And so, as folks are continuing to work in their states around extended foster care, we really encourage you to continue to center those evaluations and the implementation with the feedback and the insight from the young people that you're ultimately seeking to serve. So with that, I will turn it over to questions if we have any, and look forward to hearing from you all.
Great, thank you so much, Maddie and Rachel. So if you could all just take a minute and type in any questions that you have for our presenters into the chat box, or email me those, and I will read those out. I do have a question here. This one will be for Rachel. So the question is, National Youth and Transition Database Services include 3 types of education support: the financial assistance, and then also academic support and post-secondary educational support. Did you look at the other types, or were you only looking at the financial assistance type of support?
Yeah, it's a great question. For this particular study, we were just looking at the financial educational support.
Okay, great, thank you. So then the next question is, can you say a little bit more about what your financial skills training looks like, especially as it relates to higher ed? And that could be for whichever of you.
Yeah, so I can jump in and say, I believe that they're speaking to the KEYS program, and I am not an expert in KEYS, and I will not pretend to be, but I can connect you with experts who are, there is a very comprehensive financial literacy training piece, and you can see on the Annie Casey Foundation both the guide for presenters, people who are delivering the training, and the guide for students who are going through the training. There was a lot of care and time taken into making this sort of representative of the real world of students, not the real world of professionals. And I think that that's really reflected in the documents. I will also say, you know, there's within the Jim Casey framework of Opportunity Passport, there are different ways in which young people are able to and supported to develop different assets. And so we're happy to connect you with folks so that you might be able to, you know, if you're interested, kind of hear sort of a wider array of practices and best practices around this. So feel free to follow up with me. I don't know if my email is included, but I think Amy can probably send you an email and we can get in touch and I will get you to the right people.
Yep, sure, that works. So the next question is, what are some examples of ways that programs leverage funding to do asset building or match savings accounts for youth?
Yeah, so there's, you know, some different ways that programs are leveraging funding. Some of that comes from various sources, so like leveraging TANF. Many folks are leveraging grant funding and you know, other streams of funding that they might be able to obtain through the community, and using that as like the matching funding for and also the matching funding and sort of seed funding for young people. I honestly can't give you like a comprehensive answer to that, but again, I'm happy to share contact with information with my colleagues who oversee the Opportunity Passport program.
Great, thanks. So the next question is, this is related to the recommendations that you made at the end, or the kind of next steps. How much of the kind of next steps that need to happen, or the policy or practice or data tracking recommendations, do you think should be state legislated, and how much do you think should be federally legislated?
That's a really good question. Rachel, do you want to chime in? Because I have thoughts about that, but I wonder if you want to chime in first.
No, I think I'm happy to hear your thoughts and then I can add in after.
So, you know, I immediately go to ESSA as, you know, the piece that I kind of think about, and I do think that we actually need more federal legislation around the data, the implementation requirements. That said, I also think that there's opportunity to learn from states around the ways that they are implementing ESSA and the various elements, and particularly engaging the Department of Education around this population that in some ways is a new population for them to understand. And I think we have to be attentive to the various ways that our states fund education and local control and sort of the diversity in which that happens. But, you know, I would say, I think that the data piece in particular is something that I do think should come from a federal legislation standpoint. I think that will, on the whole, give us the opportunity to look at how our young people are making their way through K-12 in a much more dynamic way than we're able to look right now. Rachel, do you want to add some things? You probably have more expertise around NIDED.
Sure. Yeah, I think with NIDED, you know, it is a federal legislation that kind of mandates the collection of this data. And I think what we're seeing is that states have really different resources and capacity to really collect that data and then report it in a way that really then allows people to make use and make sense of what the data is showing. So I think it's, I think it's almost having a better partnership and learning from the states who are really investing in NIDED and have pretty robust data collection and good data that they're reporting, and kind of working together in partnership across states and with the federal government to figure out what that technical assistance could look like to really help the states that maybe don't have the same level of capacity currently. And kind of what resources federally could be provided to help build that across all states to allow for kind of a more consistent data collection and reporting approach than we're currently seeing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amy, if I could, can I go back to the previous question about funding for asset matching?
Sure.
I also just want to say that a number of our sites that we work with through the initiative also leverage Chafee, and just really thinking about the ways in which that can be leveraged for asset matching. And just to say, you know, I think that there's opportunity for some discussions when you think about opportunity investment accounts and ETV funding, and the potential to really make that ETV funding something much more powerful if it was invested on behalf of young people who are eligible for it earlier on, much in the same way that you know, other caregivers might invest funding for, you know, the young people in their care early on, and in, you know, college savings accounts and whatnot. So, you know, I think that there's some opportunity to explore that. You know, Dr. Elliott's work gets into that a little bit, but I would encourage states to think more broadly about, you know, what the potential for that could be.
Okay, thank you. And so our last question is, kind of given the 3 studies that you talked about today, what are the next research questions that Child Trends and the Jim Casey Initiative are looking at related to higher ed?
Rachel, I'll let you go first because you probably have some on deck that are exciting.
Yeah, I do. I think so. Something I would say just kind of broadly, as it relates to the last question, most of the information we know about extended foster care through the national, through NIDED and the other administrative data sets that are available nationally really focus on Title IV-E extended care. And so I think learning more about state-funded extended care programs and educational outcomes could be an important learning avenue to take. NIDED it does capture kind of both in the sense that it asks young people if they're still in care, and that's kind of regardless of what state they live in. But some more information, I think, just in the differences between federally funded Title IV-E extended care programs and state-funded could be an interesting route to take in looking at differences in post-secondary enrollment and completion for those young people.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. I think that would be really important to understand. I'm really interested in understanding ETV best practices. Of course, as a practitioner, I'm going to fall on the practice line of things. And, ETV is a program that we've had around for like 2 decades now. And I don't know that we have actually done an adequate job really digging into what makes those programs work and work well. And, there's a number of practices that I've seen in the states that I, have been able to be engaged with that I think are phenomenal, but they're not universally, implemented in that way. And the ways in which ETV is implemented just varies widely. And I do have a little bit of concern about how that creates some differential outcomes for young people, and would like to have more equity in what's available for young people through ETV, because I do think it's a very powerful mechanism. Though I would say when I think about ETV, I really do think about ETV as both funding and people support, because I think that that's where the strength of it really lies. And so I think we could do more work looking at ETV practices, and I think that that'd be tremendously informative for the field.
Thank you. And we did just have one other question come up, so maybe you can do, I don't know, 30-second answer to this one so we can wrap up in time. But excuse me. So the last question is, we're finding anecdotally that lack of academic readiness is as much, if not more of a barrier to post-secondary success than finances. Is there any data on readiness or proficiency among foster youth that you all are collecting?
Rachel, I'll let you answer for the Jim Casey side.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that we're interested in. We do collect a little bit of data around kind of experiences graduating high school, but that again is not really going to capture that readiness piece in depth. So I would say it's probably still an area that we're looking at, but haven't necessarily found a great way to measure it yet.
Yeah, I would agree. I think from our work within the initiative, there's not something that comes to mind as far as the data that we're capturing. However, I would point toward colleagues who, have really been looking at this for several years quite intensely. Our colleagues at Treehouse in Washington State have really been looking at the readiness aspect in particular. And I think that they probably have some things that they could share with us. I would also say this space of readiness is something that I don't think that we've really articulated well. We in education have been focused on creating more opportunities for access and enrollment and looking at high school completion, but that bridge of readiness is something that I think we have a lot of room to really dig into. And I would just love to talk with anybody who is interested in that, would like to explore that more.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Maddie and Rachel, for your presentation today. I really appreciate you presenting for us. And thank you all for coming. Just a reminder, we will be posting the recording as well as the PowerPoint and a document that has the report links that have been posted during the presentation on the NRC FAHE website in the near future. So please reach out to those, share those with people who you think might be interested. And also just a final reminder, if you'd like to join us for our future webinars, please be sure to join our listserv so that you get those emails, or reach out to me if there's something that you're having trouble enrolling in or registering for. Thank you, everyone.